Welcome. Thanks to all of you that have decided to join us here today, either live or watching the recording. Another episode of the Nonprofit Show. Today, we're sitting down with Bill Schwab, CPA with Your Part-Time Controller, which we often refer to as YPTC because everyone always loves a good acronym. But Bill's here to shed some light on using dashboards and visualizations for your NPO. Another acronym, nonprofit organization. Thanks to Julia Patrick, who came up with this wonderful platform. She serves as the CEO of the American Nonprofit Academy. I'm honored that I haven't gotten fired yet. Just kidding. But I really do love these conversations. I was really thrilled when she reached out to me in March of 2020 and said, hey, I have this wackadoo idea. Would you love to do it? And I said, yes. As the nonprofit nerd, CEO of the Raven Group, I would be more than happy to fill in and help you as the co-host of the show. And we've done about 600 episodes now, Bill. Honestly, our 600th is coming up next month, actually next week. And we could not do it without our sponsors, including Your Part-Time Controller. So thank you so much for that, as well as our other presenting sponsors, which include Bloomerang, American Nonprofit Academy, Fundraising Academy, that's with the National University, Nonprofit Nerd, Staffing Boutique, and the Nonprofit Thought Leader. And again, another shout out to Your Part-Time Controller, because we're just so honored to have these colleagues joining us from around the nation, sharing some really high-level conversations. If you missed any of YPTC's conversations with us or any of our other guests, you can find those episodes on Roku, Fire TV, YouTube, and Vimeo. If you're a podcast listener, go ahead and queue us up wherever you stream your podcast. Bill, as I mentioned, you are back again. So you're not a new face, you're not a new voice, but this is a new conversation. So I'm excited to have you back. Thank you.
Oh, thank you. Thanks for having me back. It's great. And congrats almost on episode 600. That is fantastic.
Yes, thank you. And again, seriously, thanks so much to you, your colleagues at YPTC. Tell those that are watching and listening a little bit about Your Part-Time Controller, what you offer as the nonprofit accounting specialist across the nation. So if they're new and they say, hey, I don't think I've heard this acronym before, tell them a little bit about YPTC.
Oh, thank you. I mean, I'd love to say, like you said, everyone loves a good acronym, but I always say, you look at our name, Your Part-Time Controller, it's exactly what we do. Our whole business model is right in the name. So we are accounting and financial specialists focused on functioning as outsourced controllers and CFOs exclusively for the nonprofit community. So of course, that's why we're so excited to be here on the Nonprofit Show. But also, of course, I'm a CPA, but now I get to, in my role at YPTC, sit at what I call this intersection of accounting and technology. So where accounting and technology meets, using technology to make our clients' lives easier, their processes easier. And then as we're going to talk about today, using visual images to help tell clients' financial stories as well.
Yeah, thank you for that. I always think of Your Part-Time Controller as the pot of gold at the end of the rainbow, because truly, Bill, there are so many accounting companies, but there's not many that truly dedicate in the nonprofit sector. And I have seen too many budgets misallocated and just, run amok because they didn't have that dedicated Your Part-Time Controller focus and lens in the sector. So thank you for joining us and sharing a little bit about that. So we're going to get super nerdy. And I love that Julia put these glasses here because, I am certainly known for my nerdy glasses as well. But we're going to dive into how people see these numbers or, in these graphic elements. So take it away, Bill, as the data visualization expert. How do people see numbers in graphic elements?
Sure. No, thank you. So it's all about, we always say, right, what's the old adage? A picture is worth 1,000 words, right? So there's a lot of ways to present information visually, to interpret information visually. But honestly, we say, we actually say, very oftentimes when it comes to presenting numbers, less is actually more. A lot of folks, when they're creating a graph, and we see this internally, even because we have, my team, we do a whole training program just on how to present compelling visual images to your clients. You don't need to cram every little number into your graph. And we have a saying where like every mark helps or hurts, right? So only put it in there if it's going to emphasize the point or tell the story, that you're trying to tell. So it's not so much to say we've got to put every number in here. What's important to say is, well, let's think about what the most important number is. And I think, and I know you have a slide that speaks to this a little bit later on about information overload, but really it comes back to, and it's as simple as saying, where do you want your audience to direct their attention, right? And it's as simple as that. It's where in that graphic do you want your audience to look? Where on the page? And it can be a very simple visual image that does that, as opposed to a graph that's got 50 or 100 numbers on it.
Yeah. Thank you for that. I always feel like, and we are going to talk about information overload. Our guest yesterday was a marketing representative with websites, and he shared, kind of these vanity numbers and then these so what numbers. And so I love that you said numbers are either going to help or hurt. And I'm curious, do you share the same graphics quarterly, like quarter after quarter, month after month? Like, are you sticking with those same graphics and just updating the data?
So it depends. The short answer is yes and no. So sometimes we'll design a graphic, and we had this situation for a client where we designed a graphic and it was meant to be a one-time just storytelling graphic. In this case, it was mentioning, and this happened during the pandemic, when a client, they were forced to cancel a lot of in-person events and things of that nature. But through that, it highlighted that, okay, yes, your contributions or your event revenue is going down, but you're actually generating a lot more revenue from service fees and other revenue streams. So what was originally designed to be kind of a one-time storytelling graphic that we put in front of the leadership and the board, they actually looked at that and said, oh, this is a good thing, right? Service fee revenue is a good thing. We want to grow service fee revenue. And now let's take this, what was meant to be a one-time chart, and kind of change it a little bit to now look at our progress towards growing service fee revenue. So then every month we did an update to say, yep, here's where you are, here's how it's growing, here's how close you're getting to your target. So what may have been intended, or what might be intended, is just a one-time graph. In some cases might stay that way, or in some cases might evolve into something that's then presented on an ongoing basis, either in a same or a new format.
Sure. Great example. And every time I sit around a board table, Bill, I notice that, narrative versus a chart or some kind of a visualization of a graph, there's way more dialogue actually that happens around that chart and that data visualization than the paragraph that sits next to it.
Yep, absolutely. And we take, we actually, internally within YPTC, we actually, we have an explicit standard that we follow and we train our staff on. But part of that includes, the graph is important, but it's more important to say what the graph is telling you, right? Like, think a newspaper, we actually refer to it as a headline. Don't just say, because you see a lot of graphs that might just say actual versus budget. Well, that doesn't tell me anything. Whereas, a good headline might say, hey, our building expenses are way over budget. So before you even get to the graph, what the story is that it's telling. And I think that's why some data visualizations might be difficult for people. It's not because they don't understand the numbers, but a lot of visualizations don't tell you ahead of time or don't announce what the reader should take away from it.
Right. No, those are great examples. And you had mentioned earlier data overload, right? Mm-hmm. When do we reach this information or this data overload? Because I'm sure you've seen it where people just glaze over, their eyes glass over. When do we know we've reached that?
Yeah, I think it goes back to the point, what we talked about earlier when I said, you don't need to put every number into the graph. And I think that's obviously a fine line to walk, but really you reach that point where if you're not if you're not telling the reader, and it's okay, like I said, it's okay to in that headline, it's okay to tell the reader exactly what the takeaway is. I mean, I tell our staff this: if you read the headline of the graph and you read maybe the little bit of narrative text under it, the next item you're going to get to is the graph itself. But even if you don't look at the graph, you should still be able to know what the story is just by reading that headline and that interpretation. The numbers, the graph is there to support the story you're telling in the headline. And I think, if you try to squeeze every single data point into that graphic, that's where you're getting to that data overload point. You don't need to do that. You use the graph itself to support the story you're telling, but really it's that headline and interpretation that speak to the story that needs to be told to the reader.
I really appreciate the headline and the comparison to the newspaper, because I can see that really directing the conversation. There's no ability to interpret it in a different way. So would you really dive into interpretation a little bit more and how you've maybe seen these graphs and charts being interpreted differently?
Sure, absolutely. So in terms of we work, we'll work closely with our client staff at YPTC, where they're preparing, a set of monthly financial reports for their clients. And it's very often the staff, our client service staff, they'll come to us and be like, hey, I think there's an opportunity to tell a story with a graphic here. Or maybe even, they've picked up on it through conversations with their clients, because we tell our staff, we're like, listen for clues, because a client may not know that they need a graphic or that a graphic might be useful, but just in the questions they're asking you, they might be asking for one without even realizing it. Like maybe an executive director is saying, hey, I'm reviewing the financials and these numbers here, we really the board needs to know about this, or we need to highlight this for the board. Or a board member might be saying, hey, I'm looking at these numbers. We have a certain amount of cash. Is that enough? Is it too much? Is it too little? Yeah. All those are great questions that can be answered by a graphic.
And are these graphics and the data visualization, could they be used with various stakeholders? Because I'm thinking, what a fantastic way to share that same story in a visual element with staff for them to better understand. Are they intended for multiple stakeholder groups?
They certainly can be. And it's funny, we kind of train our staff on that. We say, look, if you create a graphic, you have to assume it might get shared, right? So Absolutely. Make sure it either has all those elements we were talking about, right? It's got that headline, the interpretation, the graphic, and it either has all those elements or it doesn't. If one's missing, we're like, hey, it's not going to hang together, because if it gets copied and pasted and moved somewhere else, whoever that graphic lands in front of, it's got to have all those pieces so that new recipient has all of those elements as well. But we actually, we've had clients that have come to us and said, they've told us, they're like, look, we actually want to build graphics that we're going to show publicly, whether it's on their website, maybe it's in their annual reports. So it absolutely, we always kind of keep in the back of our mind that you have to assume and certainly embrace, I think, the fact that every graphic could potentially be used and be useful to multiple stakeholders, both inside and outside the organization.
That's very wise, because nowadays, right, information is shared so freely, so publicly, so easily. And then I also really appreciate that impact report or annual report of how you can continue to repurpose, possibly repackage. So of course, one of our live viewers here today, Bill, you mentioned, is on your data visualization group with YPTC. How large is this group within your organization there?
Yeah, so thank you. So yeah, so we have a group of five full-time folks just within YPTC who focus on all things data visualization. But we also have, and when I say part-time, not that they're part-time staff to YPTC, but they split their time between doing client service work. So the work that I started out at YPTC doing, being one of our associates and serving our clients. So they split their time between doing client service work and work for data visualization. So all told, we have seven staff members who in some capacity are dedicated to data visualization, but we're in the process, we're actually in the process, we have an internal training program on visualization that is being rolled out to all of our client facing staff.
That is fantastic. I love hearing that because, this is something we need more of and more people to understand it. I can also imagine that some people say data is scary. So what are the keys to making data or data, tomato, less fearful? Tell us what these keys might be.
Yep. It's all about, I think probably the most important thing is the reader in. Like, you want to grab their attention and say, hey, come in, there's great data here. It's not something to be afraid of. And we actually, I mentioned our training program that we do internally. We show that as a comparison with two doors. The first one, we say, is your data foreboding or is it inviting? And for foreboding, we use, we use the example of a prison. We show a big prison with a large wall and a gate, and we say, right, that's an example of something that's foreboding, but it's supposed to be, right? You're not meant to feel welcome. Obviously, that's, when you look at a graph, if that's your takeaway, you've probably missed the mark, right? You want to be able to invite the reader in. So the opposite side of that is we have this, this picture of a friendly looking door with some nice flowers and say, hey, that's what you want, right? And invite the reader in. And we do that to help, to help make the data accessible. It really comes back to, to how the data looks, right? And I mentioned that headline, that interpretation, keeping it simple, not showing more information than you need to on the graph. It helps draw the reader in, but also help direct their attention too, right? Because you and I certainly both know this, Jarrett. Executive directors, board members, they all have one thing in common, and that is they're probably all short on time, right? So you've got to get in, make your point, and make it explicitly, and say this. Remember those questions I asked, right? And if an executive director is saying, "Hey, these stats, we have to trumpet these to the board," well, make your point, right?
Yeah, no, I appreciate that. I have to ask this elephant in the room question. Should we as nonprofit leaders truly be highlighting and sharing only headlines that are positive, or can we also share those, in 6 months at this burn rate, our doors are closed?
Yeah, if that's the story to be told, and that's the story that needs to be put in front of the board, you absolutely cannot and should not shy away from that. And we've certainly had clients where we've developed graphics for that have told that story. And we try to do it in such a way to say, yes, here's the forecast. Maybe it's a cash flow forecast, and we'll say, look, based on current assumptions, current trends, this is where things are looking, this is where things are possibly trending over the next 6 to 12 months, but try to do it in such a way that's also offering alternatives, right? Saying, okay, well, if, here's possible different options, maybe there's some grants that the organization's going after. Well, if you get that grant, here's what that outcome looks like. So, there's certainly, it's never a situation where we'd love it, right? We'd love it if all we had to deliver to our clients was good news, but sometimes, unfortunately, there's some not so good news to tell. But I think because it all comes back again to how the graphic is presented, and the fact that the graphic, I think, can help tell the impactful story, to say, yes, here's the situation, here's what the organization or your organization is potentially facing over the next 6 to 12 months. But now let's talk about how we can address it and what some alternatives are to help address it.
Sure. Thank you for that. Because I know we don't want to be doom and gloom, but sometimes we need to face that reality and share the stark, sobering, data of this is where we are. I had mentioned earlier to you, Bill, that I have a colleague that has joined us live today from Canada. So glad that you're here. And they asked a live question. So I'm going to read that out loud to you and see how you might answer this for them. Right. So the question is, why do you think some CEOs or executive directors resist graphic reports to their board, or disagree on which numbers matter and might be right?
Great question. And greetings. Hello from Canada. So, I think, in terms of resisting, I think, maybe sometimes, executive directors or CEOs, we say, make the data accessible, right? But maybe sometimes the fear is, well, we don't want to make it too accessible, right? But I think it's important, it's important to have that transparency. So I certainly can understand, maybe if there is bad news, an executive director would be like, well, we don't want to explicitly say it in a graph, but I would counter that by saying, I think if there's a story to be told, a graphic helps underscore that story. And repetition isn't always bad. Sometimes it does take repetition. I had a situation, with this, with one of my own clients where, they were faced with a cash flow, a cash flow crunch. And it was one that we foresaw coming years ahead of time. And it took repeating it various ways, in the financial statements, in our written communications, in our verbal conversations, and then in our graphical communications as well, for the board to finally realize, oh yeah, we need to take action. We need to take action on this.
Yeah, great question. And I go back to, the comment or question I said, and you answered, be ready for any graph, any data visualization to get into the hands of others. And I'm curious. So the last question for me, maybe, I don't know, I shouldn't promise that, is if a CEO or executive director is resisting and showing that resistance, Bill, do you have ways in how we might start to, teaspoon feed them some data visualization that isn't fearful and helps them to better find comfort and ease in receiving that element?
Yep, absolutely. So I think it all goes back. I mentioned earlier, we kind of, we tell our staff, our client staff, this to kind of listen for those cues, right? What are the questions that your clients are having when you're meeting with them? And if you see an executive director saying, oh, I really need to, get a better understanding of where we're spending our money on this program or on that program, or how these expenses are trending. That's a question that has the potential to be answered with a graphic. So maybe when you sit down, maybe you don't put it in a report that's going to go to a board, but maybe in a one-on-one conversation with the executive director or CEO, say, hey, I remember from our last conversation you were asking about X, Y, or Z, and here's the explanation, but also here's maybe a graphical way to look at the answer to that question as well.
Great answer. I really appreciate that. Many of us use dashboards, and that has data visualization baked into it. And so, for me, really spending a lot of my time in fundraising, I focus on this data visualization because I want to see the charts and the pie graphs, and I want to see that, the line items changing there. So I like that approach, and hopefully our friend up north did too. Yeah. Well, any other tips about making them less fearful? Because I'm sure there's many more. I love the 2-door imagery. That's pretty powerful.
Yeah, absolutely. No, I mean, it's all really, and I'll say it again, but again, it all I think comes back to just knowing what the story is you want to tell and explicitly telling that story, and having the data support and your graphics support that story as well. What's that key takeaway? What's that headline? What's that interpretation? We always say, tell the reader everything they need to know and nothing they don't, right? And interpret, interpret explicitly. You just lay it out there and say, this, hey reader, this is what you need to focus on.
Yeah. Okay, I'm not done. So it finds out. How long does it take for your group to come up with some of these data visualization elements? So if we said, okay, Bill, I'm all in, I'm drinking the Kool-Aid, we need to do more of this too in our organization. Obviously becoming a client with YPTC is step one, but then how long does it take to create these graphs?
Yeah, so again, there's no one size fits all approach, but I will tell you, we very often, an associate, one of our staff members will come to us and be like, hey, I think there's a story to be told here. And within, maybe a consultation of an hour or two, and then some work on our side to actually build the graph. But within a couple days, there's usually something we can put in front of the client.
Perfect. I love that so very much. These keys to making data less fearful is really what we need. This image here, right? It really has the analog over a female, and it looks foreboding. I will say that does not look like they've rolled out the welcome mat. So thank you for all of this, Bill. As we wrap up, is there anything that your part-time controller provides to our viewers and listeners where we can find more information and data for ourselves?
Absolutely. So everything I was talking about today, the graphs, the charts, how they look, we actually have a ton of samples on YPTC's page. So if you go to YPTC's main website, there's a link to our data visualization page right from our main page. That will actually let you look at some. You mentioned dashboards, Jarrett. We have some sample dashboards that folks can play around with, and also what we call our static graphics showcase, which has dozens of examples of real life. Now, of course, they've all been scrubbed for the purposes of being on the internet, but every one of those sample graphics that you see there were originally created for an actual client.
So very helpful. And I'm going to pull up your contact information for YPTC. Your part-time controller, their web address is yptc.com. And I got the permission before we went live that Bill is very active on LinkedIn. I know we're connected, and I appreciate that. Look him up on LinkedIn. He shares some great information, as well as his other data visualization group colleagues and the entire association with your part-time controller. I learned so very much, and really just have to say thank you, because I personally have and professionally have grown through these high-level conversations. Jennifer Oliva joined us. We've had Ellie. We've had so many amazing, talented professionals from the organization across the nation. So really grateful to have your leadership in this sector.
Thank you so much. No, it's a pleasure for all of us every time we're on.
Great. Well, thank you so very much. Please do check out your part-time controller. Been a phenomenal partner of the nonprofit show for Julia and myself. So thank you so very much to all of our presenting sponsors that allow us these conversations. Today was a popular one, I can tell, because we got questions. We had a lot of live viewers. We're probably going to, blow up the streaming channels by way of people watching the replay. So again, I want to give a verbal shout out to all of our presenting sponsors that include Bloomerang, American Nonprofit Academy, Fundraising Academy with the National University, Nonprofit Nerd, Staffing Boutique, Nonprofit Thought Leader, and our very own Bill Schwab here with your part-time controller. Again, thank you to you and all of your colleagues for not only, providing this information, but providing your time, because time is money. And if anyone knows that, it's certainly YPTC. So Thank you so much, Bill, for sharing all of this wonderful wisdom with us.
No, it's my pleasure. Thanks for having me.
Absolutely. And thanks to all of you that have joined us today, either live or watching one of our recordings. We're glad that you are here joining us. As we like to end each and every episode, we end with this mantra: please stay well so you can do well. Join us back here tomorrow.